Chester, who had come after them, held his head in his hands as he helplessly watched the situation unfold in front of him. "It's all over. The kiddo and my brother are at it again." Justin was domineering. Everything was fine when Pete was obedient, but he could also be stubborn and obstinate. After all, like father, like son. Once he refused to behave, chaos would always inevitably ensue, and it was left to Chester to negotiate peace. He was just thinking of calling his parents for backup when he noticed that Justin had stopped in his tracks. Chester watched in surprise. This didn't normally happen. Justin was frozen to the spot, still holding the child. Cherry was crying hard and her sobs racked her tiny little body. She touched Justin's face with her hand. "Dad, you're my daddy." Justin was at a loss for words. His son always had a sullen look on his face, but now the child seemed a lot more animated. Big teardrops rolled down from dark eyes, accompanied with distressed wails. It made Justin feel extraordinarily helpless. He had no idea why his son was so emotional. Hey, calm down. Stop crying," Justin said hoarsely. He stretched out his hand awkwardly, trying to wipe the tears away. A soft little hand grabbed his fingers instead. "Daddy." Cherry was overwhelmed. She finally had a father. She was no longer a child that had popped up by some unexplained magic. Although Cherry was lively and outgoing, she had always felt terribly envious every time she had seen other children being lifted high into the air by their fathers. The soft voice caused Justin to swallow back the cliched, "real men don't cry" line he'd been about to resort to. He's only 5. He's still just a child. Justin's usually hard heart softened. Instead, he chided gently. "Oh, really now? Crying and making a fuss just because of some food?" He put the child back on the ground. Cherry clasped his large hand tightly as though she was afraid he'd disappear. She looked up and said, "Let's have dinner together, Daddy." Justin looked at his watch. "I only have an hour." Chester watched them speechlessly. Until now, Pete had gone home hungry and accepted punishment instead of pushing his luck. Something must have changed in him. Cherry was terribly excited. She had found such a handsome father. She didn't stop to question this life-changing revelation. She chatted to him constantly. "Eat this, Daddy. This is expensive. Don't drink so much juice, Daddy. It's too filling. You won't have space to eat much." Justin stared solemnly at this child who was behaving like a totally different person from his son. Chester, who joined them, whispered jokingly, "Justin, has Pete had a personality transplant?" After they'd eaten, Cherry took Justin's hand and walked toward the table in the corner. "Daddy, look, Mummy's over there." Justin looked where she was pointing and saw the woman again. She was leaning against the comfortable sofa in the corner, not paying attention to anything going on around her. She rested her head on one hand as she ate absent-mindedly, chasing the food around her plate with a fork. She was undeniably charming and had beautiful pianist fingers. A child sat opposite her, only the top of their hair visible to Justin. He assumed it was her daughter. Justin stopped staring and bent down to look at Cherry solemnly. "She's not your mummy." "Yes, she is. She is my mummy." Justin studied the child and said harshly, "Remember this. Don't ever trust any woman, especially a beautiful one." Cherry's eyes widened in outrage. Why won't he accept Mummy? She started crying again, only this time they were hot, angry tears of sadness, not joy. "If you don't recognize her as my mummy, then you're not my father." Justin was getting increasingly cross and his face showed it. His brain whirred as he thought, how has that woman bewitched my son to make him say something like that? He suddenly realized something and asked, "Did you come down here together?" Cherry replied, "Of course." It was as he'd suspected. It seemed clear to him now. Why else would he suddenly want pizza? Justin scoffed to himself. That woman had been flirting with another man this afternoon, and now she was once again trying to seduce him by using his son. It seemed the verbal warning he'd given her the previous night hadn't been enough. He spoke more forcefully this time. "You're not to talk to her anymore." Cherry looked sadly over at her mother in confusion, then up at her big, tall father. In the end, she gritted her teeth and headed toward the exit with Justin. She wanted to help her mummy bring Daddy home, and she jabbered away at him as they headed to collect his coat. "Daddy, isn't my mummy good looking? She's so much prettier than lots of celebrities. If you get together again, think how good you'll look. You'll make such an impressive couple." Justin stared at him in wonder. What on earth had that woman said to my son? Nora was close to falling asleep. She was curious as to why her daughter seemed to have been so exceptionally sensible the whole evening. She was usually such a fussy eater, but she hadn't picked anything off her pizza. She'd eaten the whole thing. Nora also couldn't understand why she was eating so slowly. That was different too. She was slightly worried. Have you eaten enough yet? Pete rubbed his belly. He knew that he'd probably be grounded by his dad when he got back upstairs, but he dawdled for over an hour because he was reluctant to part with his mummy now he'd found her. In response to her question, he smiled shyly and said, I think I want another piece of cake. Go ahead. Nora smiled back at him and then sank further into the comfy sofa and closed her eyes. Cherry had taken the opportunity to sneak back in and check on her mother while Justin and Chester were collecting their belongings. When she saw how sleepy she looked, she felt guilty. Her mom had been working so hard lately, and coming out for dinner with her was taking time out of her sleep schedule. They hadn't even eaten together in the end. She shouldn't have gone with Daddy and left Mummy here. Cherry walked over and sighed. Are you sleepy, Mummy? Let's go back upstairs. She's finally full, thought Nora as she stretched. Okay. They left the restaurant holding hands. A minute later, Pete came back from the cake counter and saw the empty table. The light in his eyes slowly dimmed and his shoulders slumped. His father's deep voice spoke behind him. Time's up. Where did you disappear to? Pete's tiny body trembled. He turned around and saw his dad standing impatiently behind him. He almost shrank back in fear, knowing he'd be scolded for the evening's escapade. But the next moment, Justin bent over and picked him up. He even asked, Are you full? Pete was surprised by his dad's unusual behavior. He was expecting to be yelled at, not hugged. Why isn't he angry? Maybe he's decided to be nicer to me from now on. Nora was about to go to bed when the doorbell rang. She asked impatiently, Who is it? An unfamiliar male voice replied, Miss Smith, my name is Hunt. Hunt? Nora got up. Open the door, Cherry.